Okay, so namaskar, everybody. Um, my subject is Microvita today. And before going into the details of Microvita science, I would like to give a survey in order to contextualize Microvita within a greater framework. So I have two topics, or two parts of this lecture. First part is contextualizing Microvita. Second part, after this one, is Introduction to Pierre Sarkar's Microvita concept. So let me start with contextualizing it. And contextualizing means here not in the Indian framework, but in the European framework or in the Western framework, because Microvita have some correspondence to European thoughts, and this makes it easier for us to connect with other people. If we are talking simply about Microvita, non-Margies will hardly understand us. But if we bring it in the context of European history and European, or I should better say Western thought, then it is more easy for them to understand what we mean. So, one moment. Again, my screen is not working. Okay. So, the context of Microvita in all is alchemy. And the history of alchemy goes back even to Shiva's times. So this shows, for example, a picture from the museum. It's an old display showing Shiva and his wife Parvati and his children in the Himalayas making some medicine. So this he is supposed to be the founder of alchemy. Some 30 years ago, I was in India to learn Ayurveda. And at that time, I spent also sufficient in the Rasa Shastra department. And the main procedure in Rasa Shastra department is the mixture of sulfur and mercury. This shows the traditional procedure. So in this stone mold, they mix mercury in the middle with the sulfur powder. And they use a mortar and rub it for about an hour or so. And it produces an amalgamation of mercury and sulfur. Then this mixture is put into such bottles, and these bottles are heated with coal. So it becomes very hot, and a steam is coming out of the bottle. And the steam goes out of this opening, but on the cooler inner surface of this bottle, violet crystals are forming. And these crystals are a type of salt which is used in Ayurvedic medicine. So in this simple procedure, we have three steps. There is mercury, there is sulfur, and there is a salt. And we will meet these three later again. So alchemy flourished in India in various parts and in various variations. But it also came to the West, and the first place where it came to and flourished was in Egypt. On this plate, we see on the right side one person that is Trismegistus, and he is teaching to Ptolemeus how to practice alchemy and the medicines which are produced by alchemist procedures. This is from Ptolemaic times. The Ptolemaic kings or pharaohs were the last in the row of all the pharaohs in Egypt. So this is quite a late depiction, but the alchemy was practiced much earlier also in Egypt. Then the pharaohs were defeated by the Romans, and the Roman Empire also finished, and the knowledge of all the secret sciences went eastward, mostly to Baghdad and the area around Baghdad. In Baghdad and in the Arabian civilization, alchemy flourished and was practiced and further developed. And with this alchemy, also medicine was brought to a significant height. At that time in Europe, the conditions were quite poor. The Roman Empire had died, and in France and in Germany, the culture was not very much developed. So those who wanted to learn about culture and cultural achievements, they had to go to either to Byzance or even more east to Aleppo and Baghdad. So this picture shows Arabian men practicing alchemical procedures. And among them, among the Arabian alchemists, one was of most significance. He is called the Geber, and he is depicted on this picture. At that time, from Venice, the merchants of Venice made all the trading with the East and with the Arabian people. And they brought not only the goods from Arabia to Europe, they brought also knowledge and scriptures from there. And Venice became the hub of alchemy at that time. So there are several places in Venice where alchemy was practiced, but even today we can find near the Rialto Bridge, this pharmacy. It is called La Farmacia alla Testa d'Oro. And in this pharmacy, the Arabian, the Jewish, and the Christian scientists met and exchanged their views about how to practice this science. This is a view into an alchemist laboratory of Venice, how it might have looked. So later, the trade with Arabia was no longer so profitable because Spanish and Portuguese people had found a way to bypass this trade link by ship, going around Africa directly to India. And Venice was suffering from this lack of trade. So the culture shifted northward and it came to Prague. And Prague became the capital of alchemy at that time. So in Prague, we have 3 places of alchemist practice mostly. One is the Prague Castle. The other is a place of the old castle, Vidrerad. And the next one is a place in the old city near the Jewish ghetto. And I visited it recently. And this is the cellar where the where the alchemist practices were done in 500 years ago. This is also the time when Rabbi Löw lived there and became very famous for his actions. He visited the same place which I showed you, this one, but he was also busy in creating the creature named Golem. The golem was his creation. So all these things also came to Germany. And one of the first ones who practiced it was Dr. Faustus, whom we got to know because of Goethe was writing Faust Part 1 and Part 2. So Dr. Faustus, he was born in Baden-Württemberg. That is the place where he was born, Knittlingen. And we have a very nice museum there, which displays all the details of alchemy in those times. Here on this, we see the basics of alchemy, which were practiced in those times. And they distinguish 4 steps. One is the unity of things. The second is the duality of things, like male and female, like sulfur and mercury. The third is the threefold of things, like sulfur, mercury, and the salt, which I mentioned in the beginning. And the fourth is the elements, which were counted in Europe as earth, water, air, and fire. In India, a fifth one was counted, which is the ether. So in India, we have the Pancha Mahabhuts, and in Europe, we have earth, water, air, and fire. The next one to mention is Paracelsus. He lived a little bit later than Faust, and he was putting alchemical knowledge into practice. Of course, it is not the medicine which we are using today, but there was a strive to do it less from the theory and more from the practice point of view. Actually, Paracelsus is quite near to me because 30 years ago, I had to give a talk in Stuttgart about Paracelsus and his relation to natural medicine. And from those times, I'm still connected and close to his ideas. So from those times also, I know very much that one of his principles was, which is an old alchemical principle, as above, so below, symbolized in this small ornament. As above, so below. This was always a motto of alchemists, and it means that the universe is reflected in the microcosm. Or in other words, the macrocosm is reflected and mirrored in the microcosm. Even in those times, that is 500 years ago, they had the concept that the universe is created from, they called it God, which is here in the upper part. And from this divine source, light was emitted, which goes in a big circle. And this bird is meaning the soul of a human. And that soul will ultimately return to the origin, to the divine light. So this is the circle of creation depicted almost 550 years ago. And it very much resembles our Brahma Chakra. So the next one, which I have to bring to your notice, is Jakob Böhme. He is not so much known, but Hegel, the great philosopher Hegel, he was totally aware of Böhme, and he said that his main inspirations and thoughts were received from this Jakob Böhme. He lived in Görlitz, and he was a mystical philosopher, and he made a distinction which became important for our times. He made a distinction between two German words. I cannot translate it. Even in German, it is an unusual word. So it is Grund and Ungrund. So Grund means basic reason, and Ungrund means the opposite. And in German language, there is hardly a word for the opposite of basic reason. But at least this philosopher, Jakob Böhme, he invented this word, Ungrund. So he built his philosophy on this duality. He said there is a reason, a basic reason, and there is the opposite of this basic reason. Two principles. And from these two principles, he built his philosophy. Now, 100 years later, Leibniz, he was a completely different type of person, but he learned from Jakob Böhme this distinction between Grund and Ungrund, between the basic reason and its opposite. And according to his times, he didn't indulge in mystical thought. Rather, he was trying to put it in practical terms, and this means in technical terms. And he understood this duality as one and zero. And he was the first who was able to make from this duality, one and zero, a complete system of numbers. So the binary system which we have nowadays, and which is working in every computer. Every computer is working with only these two digits, only with 0 and 1. But with these two numbers, it creates everything which we see on screens and. So the binary system which we use nowadays comes from Leibniz, and he got the inspiration to do this, to create everything out of these two numbers only, from Jakob Böhme. So another 100 years later, there was Carl Friedrich Gauss, and he made a significant step. He added to these two numbers, 0 and 1, one more number, and that number is called I. Small letters. It's a small I. It's the root, the square root from -1, abbreviated as I. And with this I, there is a lot of confusion. Some people might have learned about the imaginary numbers in school, and usually we get sick with that because we don't understand the concept. But here in our understanding, in our effort to understand the Microvita, the I is very important. So this is why I insist on this point, although it is difficult. I know it is difficult, but we have to understand it. So Gauss wrote, this is almost 200 years ago, he wrote that the concept of I is so much confused also because of its weird name. Imaginary distorts the meaning, and he suggests it would have been much better if instead of imaginary, the square root of -I would have called a lateral unit. A lateral unit. So he said instead of positive, negative, and imaginary numbers, one should have spoken about direct, inverse, and lateral units. And then this darkness around the imaginary would have disappeared. But we have to understand that the strange name of imaginary number has a reason. It has a reason, and that goes back to Descartes, who liked this name because he wanted to say that they are completely useless. But 200 years later, they found that they are not useless at all, and the name remained and confused the scholars. But we have to rectify that and to see how important they are. Now, before coming to the details of these imaginary numbers and microvita which are related to them, I have to mention that even in psychoanalysis, these things were of high importance. So beside Freud, also Jung was engaged in alchemy and in these mysteries. And he wrote actually two books. The first one, Psychology and Alchemy, in his younger age, and the mysterium of the conjunctium, he wrote in his old age, the second one. Now, there's a last person which I would like to highlight. This is Elizabeth Rauscher. She died about 15 years ago. And she was introducing something which we also need to understand microvita. She introduced complex spaces. Usually, and in the second part, I will go in more details into this. Usually, we see space as a three-dimensional object. But Rauscher and her co-workers, they investigated in supernatural phenomena, especially in precognition. And she found that it needs an additional complex space to complement the physical space which we have. And this additional space was equipped with an imaginary metric, so that we have a six-dimensional space with three dimensions in real numbers and three dimensions in imaginary numbers. And these two spaces make up a complete complex space, so that phenomena can be explained which cannot be explained if space has only three dimensions. So these are some of her works, but we don't have to go into these details. What I want to mention is that in that relation, they are using light cones. And here we see the normal light cone. It is made of the space, and in the vertical axis, the time. And additionally, in 90 degrees or in 45 degrees turn, we see a second time and space axis with imaginary numbers. So altogether, it makes a complex space, but not in cubes, but in light cones. Now, this is the time where we can introduce Microvita and Baba. And usually we read Baba without knowing all that what I was telling before. And this is why we get confused. We get usually so much confused because he is talking from a perspective for which we are not prepared. And if we would know how much work was done in this relation in India, in Rasa Shastra and in alchemy and in Indian astrology and so on and so forth, all the secret sciences, then we would understand him even better. But I think this is not possible for us. This has to be done by our Indian colleagues. But we can do something which I tried to initiate here. We can try to understand him from the perspective of secret sciences in Europe or in the West. There's not much secret science in America, but it's mostly European secret sciences. So in this short time, we cannot go into the details of his Microvita science, but let me highlight 2 points, which are in matter and abstract and in the questions part. So the first which I would like to highlight is where he says, now, the entity or entities coming within the conception of the mind are pure abstract. And those coming within the perceptions or feelings of the sensory or motor organs are matter, pure matter. But the position of energy and microvita is on this silver lining of demarcation between matter and abstract. So he makes it clear that the microvita is not matter, it is not abstract, but it is on the silver lining between these two. So matter and abstract, they interact in some way, and in that space of interaction, in that silver lining of demarcation, we have to look and we have to see this microvita which he is talking about. So 23 years ago, I understood this sentence, these sentences of Baba, in such a way that I thought there's a matter core and there is an abstract space around. And between this abstract and matter, there is a lining, a silver lining, which is composed of microvita. This was in 2002. This is how I thought together with my Acharya Vimalananda, how we can understand his saying. Now, a few pages later, there's another part where he says, also in this relation, he says that what is the silver line of demarcation between matter and, no, sorry, then what is the silver line of demarcation between matter and idea? So again, he asks the same. Of that silver lining, the outside is matter, and the other side, the inner side, is idea. That is, this silver lining is made of the initial stage of matter and the cruder stage of idea. If you consider that the atom is the constituent of matter, likewise, idea is the constituent of microvita. So in this, the constellation is reverse. The idea is in the middle and matter is around. And in between, there is a silver lining again. And these microvita are again interacting between idea and matter. So he says that the matter is basically made of atoms, and the ideas are basically made of something which approaches the microvita. So the crude ideas become microvita, and the subtle atoms become microvita. So in this space between, they interact and can be understood. So to bring these two pictures into one, once the abstract is outside and once the abstract is inside, we can see this type of bubble with an invagination. So here what is outside goes inside, and both pictures can be put into one image. Now, to create this interaction between the matter and the idea, we use these imaginary numbers again. And these imaginary numbers, they have a very strange property. That strange property is that if you multiply, for example, the number 1 with I, it becomes I. And if you multiply it again with minus I, it becomes again 1. So this simple formula here in the middle can make a re-entry, and then you get a circle which produces the simplest case of self-reference. And self-reference is a fundamental property of consciousness. Consciousness needs to be created a self-reference. And this is the simplest case imaginable. Now, of course, the number is very abstract. We have to put something for the number. And that what we can take as 1 is the essential quality of something. And that which we can take as I is the quale, is the subjective feeling of that something. So the quality of something and the subjective feeling of that something, they go in a circle, and that circle can be described by such a very simple equation. Now we can modify it a little bit, and here we get the same, not in 2 steps, but in 4 steps. So 1 multiplied by I gives I multiplied by I gives minus I, multiplied by I gives minus, this minus I multiplied by I gives minus I, and again multiplied by I gives plus 1. So this is a 4-step circle described by this formula. And then we can go another step further, where we don't operate simply with the number 1, but with the complex entities. So here, for example, we have a Schrödinger equation. And that Schrödinger equation can also be multiplied by such an operator. And then the same thing happens, that this Schrödinger equation first goes into the imaginary realm, then it goes into the negative realm, then again it goes in the imaginary, and finally it goes back to the original realm, and this can again go into a re-entry. So this is the formula to do it in 4 steps, and it can be repeated again and again, for example, 100,000th time. And by repeating this process, we get a stabilization of content in the consciousness. We will come to this point a little bit later, but now let me conclude what we said. We said there is as above, so below. And on the big scale, like in macrocosm, as well as in the microcosm on the small scale, we have 4 principles operating. The 4 principles are, the first one is coincidentia oppositorum. So there's a duality, like Shiva Shakti, Grund Ungrund, 1 and 0, and many more, of course. And these opposites, they coincide, and they don't fall apart, but they cooperate, and they create almost everything. Then this creation is ruled by 3 principles. So in yoga, we have the 3 principles of sattva, raja, and tama. In Ayurveda, we have the 3 principles of vata, pitta, kapha. And in alchemy, we have the 3 principles of mercurius, sulfur, and salt, which I was mentioning in the very beginning. Then we have 4 spaces. And on Sarkar, on Baba's four-chamber model with the four spaces, I will come to speak just after this part. And finally, we have the 5 elements, which are in Ayurveda. They are called Prithvi, Jala, Tejas, Vayu, and Akash. And in the European tradition, it is called earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So what I wanted to say in this part, that Baba talks in a context which has been forgotten almost in Europe. And it was forgotten because these thinkers and these philosophers, they were mingled and rubbed between two big stones. One stone was the church with its scholastic philosophies, and the other stone was the modern science with its positivistic approach. And these two grinding stones were dissolving that tradition, which was very lively in the times of Renaissance and a little bit later until maybe 1650 or 1700. That tradition was still lively. But from the 19th century on and the whole 20th century, it was practically forgotten. Still, it has not disappeared, and we can recover it and use these traditions in order to understand what Baba gave us. And in this light, Baba's teachings become much better understandable, and most of all, they become communicable to others. Because if we talk in our Sanskrit terms, others will not understand us. But if we can describe what Baba says in terms of the tradition I was mentioning here, then everybody can understand. So for these things, I, together with Acharya Vimalananda, I have written 3 books. This is the one from 2012, the other from 2017, and this is the 3rd one from 2023. And for those who are more interested in these fields, I would recommend to look into this book, Much Ado About Nothing. Edward Grant, he speaks about the void and about everything modern physics doesn't mention. And the second book is Panpsychism in the West, which does the same from a philosophical point of view, because panpsychism was also suppressed in these last 400 years sufficiently. We have an institute. This is called Microvita Research, registered. And on the basis of this institute, I'm working, publishing, and promoting Baba's ideas. So those who are interested, they can join our institute. So now I would like to make a small pause and then continue with the second part. Didi?
Thank you, Manohar. Fantastic. Very interesting.
It came over. It worked. The technology